That in the Bible? That in the Bible? That's what the preacher man said. We supposed to be rich. Is that in the Bible? Hey yo! Brownie points if anybody knows this song. It's an oldie but goodie. Very appropriate for tonight though. Is that in the Bible? Super brownie points if anybody knows that song. What's up, y'all? Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome tonight. Two of Spare the Rod and the Child. If this is night one for you and you don't know who I am, hello again. My name is Elise, and I'm just so excited that we are officially on day 2 of our 3-day series. So if you missed yesterday, I would encourage you to go back and check out that replay if you can. Yesterday, I just shared a little bit of my story and my why, and I talked about just how I've got to the point to where I recognize that a lot of Black parents, especially those connected to the Christian community, how we are unknowingly recycling these disciplined habits that continue to leave a legacy of intergenerational trauma. So I shared a little bit about my background as a certified parenting coach and an ordained minister, and even as a mom of 2, and how all those things have really pushed me to be passionate about equipping parents and the village with the tools to raise not just spiritually mature, but also emotionally mature kids as well. So again, if you are joining, catch the replay yesterday if you missed that when you get a chance, but I'm so glad you are here tonight. And so with that being said, I do want to give us a couple of I guess warnings, you can say, a couple of warnings or just disclaimers, I would say, for tonight's time. Just because of the nature of the topic tonight, I do want to give us, again, 3 warnings. One would be the possibility of experience a trigger, all right? So I want to give a trigger warning. They'll be related to your own personal trauma experience. So if you find yourself feeling triggered, y'all, please, please, please step away. You have full permission to turn me off, all right? And come back later when you have the capacity. But if you find yourself getting triggered, please step away. Put your needs first, please. Another warning I want to give for a moment you may experience tonight, just again, due to the nature of the topic, are those ouch moments. So those are those moments that really highlight hurt or discomfort when we feel our toes being stepped on, if y'all know what I mean. And so I want to encourage you guys to really lean into those moments, though, like lean into them and remind yourself of why we are here. We are here to be empowered, not embarrassed. All right. So if you find yourself having those ouch moments, I encourage you to lean into it. I like to explain it kind of like a dog bite. Like, I know that's kind of, out there graphic, but think about that for a second. If a dog were to bite you, our natural tendency would be to jerk away, but that would actually cause more damage. But if we actually like shove our arm down that dog's throat, he will loosen his grip, right? And so I want to encourage us to lean into those ouch moments because it actually does more damage sometimes to just pull away. All right. And then the third warning I want to give you for a moment you may experience tonight are those aha moments. And that's referring to any revelations you might be having or any epiphanies that come up for anything you want to take away from my time and actually implement into your parenting. All right. So just wanted to give those fair warnings. Also, StreamYard, let me pull up Facebook on my phone because StreamYard tripping. Yeah, they told me that it's not going to display Facebook comments. And last night I could not see y'all comments. I apologize. So what I'm going to do is pull up on my phone Facebook so I can actually see those comments. So y'all bear with me 1 second. Okay, let's see if this works. So maybe the little delayed. I apologize, y'all. Again, StreamYard is not letting me display comments or even see comments on here. So I'm going to pull up my phone so I can see if I can actually respond. All right. So thank you for your patience. Tonight, again, with night 2, we're going to talk about a few common beliefs, a few sayings, and just kind of unpack them to discover, like, is this fact or fiction? All right. And so let's jump in with the first one, which you guys probably can guess what it is based on the title of the series. The first we're going to hit on tonight is Spare the Rod, Spoil the Child. a very common saying, right? That so many people are familiar with. But what's so interesting is that a lot of people don't know, yeah, this is not scripture. Spare the rod, spoil the child is not in the Bible. Hence the intro song tonight. Go look it up. Spare the rod, spoil the child is not in the Bible. So this is actually a poem written in the 17th century from a guy named Samuel Butler. And get this, yeah, he was actually mocking religion when he wrote it. And I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna move past it real quick, but it's believed that like the poem actually had nothing to do with kids. Yeah, it was an erotic poem. Samuel was actually being a little kinky. All right, but I'm gonna move on past that. Do your own research. But we use this all the time to justify disciplining kids, and it's like that's not even like we are convinced that this is the whole scripture and it's not, it's a poem. So the question then becomes, so what does the scripture say? And there actually are several scriptures in Proverbs that reference the rod and correction. One in particular being Proverbs 13 and 24. And it says, whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. And so it's important to remember, all right, that Proverbs is a book of poetry. We know it as the book of wisdom, which is true, but books of the Bible have different literary devices that they're using, different literary styles they're written in. And Proverbs is a book of poetry. And so this is a figurative verse that many people have taken literally. And if you know anything about poetry, you know that writers of poetry, they use familiar words that are used in the time that they're writing to help the readers create an image of what they're actually writing about. So this concept of being a shepherd was literally an image people could easily understand back then. So the question then becomes, what was a rod? Okay, so in biblical times, a shepherd consistently used both a rod and a staff to tend to the flock. Both were used to protect the sheep, each in a very specific way. All right, this is what's super important. Listen to it, because again, we're talking about a rod, right? So the rod, when a shepherd used the rod in those days, it was like a straight stick that they literally used to guide and direct the sheep. The rod was used to fight off wild animals. So the rod was again used to protect the sheep from these wild animals. They may try to come and eat them. The rod was also used to prod them during the day in the fields. And if they needed to prod the sheep back into the sheepfold at night, that's what they used, this stick, this rod. It was also used to count the sheep. That's so good to me. If you ever been somebody who laid out to a son talking about how he left the 99 for the one, it's because he used the rod to make sure every sheep was accounted for. And so we have to remember sheep are they're dependent on the shepherd, like literally they depend on the shepherd for direction, they depend on the shepherd for protection, because they are not independent creatures. So they, for example, sheep, I know people like to give them this idea of being dumb. I wouldn't say sheep are dumb, but they do some wild things. One being they will literally eat anything, whether it's something that could kill them or not, okay? They are not strong. They are not survivors. They quickly wander away and can easily be led astray. So without the shepherd's care, sheep are in like a whole lot of danger because they are not hunters. They can't find their own food and they are small and defenseless. So all these things contribute to why the shepherd uses the rod to, one, keep them going in the right direction, to make sure they're accounted for, and to keep them in line. And so keeping all these things in mind, of course, that will make sheep very easy to be prey for predators. And again, that's why the shepherd keeps a close watch over his flock to protect and preserve the flock. Y'all making this connection? So when sheep go astray, again, the shepherd will prod them back into the sheepfold to help put any wandering sheep back on the right path. Now, that's a whole message within itself, but we need to continue to break it down. The shepherd used the rod again to guide them, to protect them, to keep them away from things that they could not even protect themselves from. Sheep were not beaten with the rod. It's not what it was used for. The rod represented guidance and protection. And so if we look back again at Proverbs 13:24, and plug in what we know, right, it makes a little more sense. So last night, if you were not with us, we talked about what discipline actually means. We talked about how discipline comes from the same root word as disciple, which means to be a student or a pupil. And so discipline means to teach. And so keep that in mind again from last night as we read this again. And I'm keeping on screen how it is, but again, we're plugging in what we know. So, rereading it, whoever spares guidance hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to teach them. Maybe it's just me. That is so good to me. Whoever spares guidance hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to teach them. I think I saw I'm looking down on my phone, y'all, because I got to look here for the comments that StreamYard playing me. But yes, Simone, I see you. Hey, Nia. Yes. So when we plug in what it actually means, it makes more sense, right? That we are to not withhold guidance from our kids and we are to teach them. And so that's basically the recap of the whole spare the rod, spoil the child, you guys. The shepherd never beat their kids with the rod. It's not what they used it for. They used it to guide and protect and to lead the sheep. So that's our first one when it comes to fact or fiction. And again, yes, there are a couple of more scriptures in Proverbs that we could unpack the exact same way, but that is the idea of how the rod was used, and that's consistently. All right. So the next common belief, y'all let me know, was that new information? What y'all thinking? I'm still trying to look down and do both. I see Nia saying, wow, yes, yes. So let me know, y'all, is that new information, familiar with that? But that really is amazing. I heard somebody say a quote one time that has always stuck with me. And not saying that as believers or Christians that we, try to be con artists. I don't believe that. But I do believe this quote is so powerful. It said, when you take the text out of context, you're left with a con. So think about how you spell context, context. And that's why it's so important that we keep scripture in context, because when you take the text out of context, you're left with a con. So that was just so powerful, and an encouragement to just always keep the scripture in context. Because again, not only is spare the rod, spoil the child not scripture, right? But then the scriptures that talk about it, we made it believe or made it mean what we wanted to mean versus what it actually was saying. So just keep that in mind when it comes to spare the rod. Rashara, I see you. She said that really helped me. That's good. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. All right. So that's our first one. Yeah, our first fact of fiction on what that means. So I hope that encourages you to just reconsider, right, how we assess that to be our reason for doing certain things. Changes everything. I see you, Don. Thanks for sharing. All right. So the next saying I want us to hit on tonight. P.S. Don, I did see you yesterday name. So people were saying like, oh no, this was too short. Yeah, if someone wanted to go back and watch all three of these series, like I want you to do that and not have to take your whole day to do it. So that's why I'm trying to not be too quick. I want to take our time, but I also want to be mindful of the time so that you can watch all 3 nights in one setting if you so choose. So just wanted to name that. I'm not going to rush tonight, but definitely want to move with a sense of urgency. So if someone goes back to watch, you can watch all 3 in a timely way. So just wanted to name that. So Done on fuss at me for being too short tonight. All right. So y'all ready for the next one? Y'all say something so you ready for the next one. Let me see some comments telling me you ready. If you are ready for the next one, we are going to move to. Actually, let's do this. If you have, and this again, this is no judgment, you guys, but for this next one, if you have said it or heard it, I just want you to type yes in the chat. If you have said it or heard it, I just want you to type yes. And so the next one we're going to talk about is this belief that I turned out all right. So this is for the adult who was physically disciplined as a child. And when people talk about this topic, their response is, well, I got beat as a child and I turned out all right. Have y'all ever said that or heard it? No judgment. No judgment. Have you ever said that or heard it? I turned out all right. And the reality is, this is a very common, oh my God, this is such a common saying. And I meet this saying with so much compassion and so much genuine curiosity. And what I mean by that, when someone communicates, I'm just going to ask you, if you are someone who has made this statement that I turned out all right, I would genuinely want to know, how are you defining all right? And I mean that with so much seriousness and so much genuine curiosity. Like, how are we defining all right? And most times, I'm gonna be honest, most times when I'm having this conversation, many parents have never thought about that. Like, well, how do I define all right? Like that, that's a good question, right? How do I define it? And so we, and again, as we continue the conversation, I want to pose these questions to you all tonight. If this is you, if you are someone, who feel like you turned out all right and not sure how you define all right, I'm curious to know, how do you respond to these particular questions? So, because when I think about all right, I think about someone who's able to express their emotions. So how are you with expressing your emotions? I will also be curious to know, like, how well do you self-regulate? How do you feel about communicating your frustration without being verbally or physically aggressive? And then I become curious about emotional intelligence skills. So, are you able to create and maintain healthy relationships? What does that look like? What does all right look like for that? Are you able to make responsible choices and accept the outcomes? I'm curious to know, like, what does all right look like for that? How's your self-awareness? Do you have clear knowledge of your own thoughts, your own feelings and motivations? Do you have the capacity to appreciate another person's perspective and empathize with them? How are we defining all right? What does that look like? Is it hard for you to be flexible in your thinking when it comes to taking on somebody else's perspective? This is a real one. How well do you create and uphold boundaries when it comes to being all right? What's your relationship like with your voice? Are you able to say no when that's really what you desire to say? Are you able to say yes and agree to things? Or do you just say yes and agree to things because you're afraid you'll upset people? Because all these things, you guys, all those things I just asked, I know there was a long list, but all of those things are connected to being physically disciplined, because all these things are really common and connected to being physically disciplined. All right. And so if this is how we are defining all right, which again is each person's prerogative, if this is how you're defining all right, my question then becomes, is this the kind of all right you desire for your children? And only you can answer that. Only you can answer that. So these are the important questions to really begin to understand just how impactful those experiences were, because the reality is that research has shown that children who are physically punished have many of the same negative outcomes as children who are physically abused. So we see these same outcomes as far as mental health and emotional challenges and lower cognitive ability, lower self-esteem, more aggression, more antisocial behavior, negative relationship with parents, like all these things, the same outcomes we see a lot of kids who are physically abused, we see the exact same thing for kids who are physically disciplined. And so again, just something to keep in mind, because other studies and reviews have added that stress from physical punishment for children can negatively affect their brain development. Because we got to remember, again, discipline meaning to teach. Discipline is engaging the brain through teaching. But the thing about punishment is that real skills are not being learned, because the brain, again, talking about that brain science, the brain literally cannot learn when it's in a state of fear. So that part of the brain is offline. We're in a state of fear. When our nervous system has sensed a threat, we literally switch from learning mode to survival mode. And that's the beautiful thing about our nervous system. Literally, one of the purpose of the system is to let us know when we are in danger. It's saying, hey, you're in danger. You should run right now. You should freeze. You should fight for your life. Our bodies kick into gear to literally save our life. So this system was made to only kick in, though, when survival is needed. It wasn't designed to stay on, because this leaves our body in such a heightened state. And we were never meant to be in a heightened state when we're experiencing adrenaline and cortisol pumping through our bodies consistently, because those particular hormones are meant to be released momentarily. So when we have them released often, especially in a home setting when we should find safety, right? And so if we have these hormones released so often, it can affect lots of things like our concentration. It affects our ability to absorb nutrition. So you can be eating all the great foods and you're still not getting the nutrients you need, because your body is ready to fight and not ready to rest. is not ready to recover. It affects our ability to engage in the world around us. And that's literally by definition what trauma is. So trauma literally translate into the word that means wound. Trauma means it's a wound. So trauma is any wound from the past that affects how you show up in the present and how you perceive the future. So a lot of people who say I turned out all right may actually be experiencing unresolved trauma that keeps that danger system on, that keeps that system heightened. So what does that look like? That could look like when your kid runs into your room and they're screaming because they're excited, but your body responds as if you're in danger. So you yell or lash out. Your brain literally registered that as danger, even though it was joy, because that's how trauma affects how we perceive the world. So again, trauma is any wound from the past that affects how you show up in the present and how you perceive the future. All right. So again, just something to think about when we say we turned out all right. Again, how are we defining all right? That's one. And then based on how we're defining all right, when it comes to our own ability to set boundaries, our own relationship with our own voice, is that the all right we want for our kids? And again, only you can answer that question for yourself, but just something to consider when we think about I turned out all right. All right. And then the last saying or belief we're going to go over tonight is I'm preparing them for the real world. I'm preparing them for the real world. This one is a huge reason, from what I have heard in my experience with just working with different families and have different conversations. This one is a huge reason why many people push back on this idea of gentle parenting. And it's one reason, to be honest, I believe many lack the understanding that gentle parenting is really just appropriate parenting. It's parenting in a way that's, again, developmentally appropriate for the child. But I also think for us, and when I say us, I mean people who look like me. I think for us that it's also this reality when we talk about I'm preparing them for the real world. It's this reality that my child having a voice in the wrong setting could be fatal. That's the reality, right? And this is a reality for Black people because of the threat that some people already perceive that we are, right? So I'm not naive to that. I'm not naive to that at all, with this understanding that I'm preparing them for the real world. And so we have to realize that we cannot, in the way that many parents can, we cannot protect our children's bodies the way that we want to. And this is an incredibly difficult thing, that we have to face in the current world that we live in. So for me, what has given me peace is the understanding that, one, I've entrusted my kids to God, but two, He has entrusted me to be their first experience. And that's so powerful, because one thing we know is that our kids' first experience of relationship and connection to us as their parents, it literally sets the foundation for who they will believe themselves to be. And that is such a big deal, because trauma isn't the only thing that can be inherited. We talk about, these generational cycles, and trauma can be inherited. That is true, but emotional safety can be inherited also. So the sense of goodness and belonging that I show my kids can also be genetically passed down to them. That is a big deal. So no matter how someone else treats them, they can still know who they are. So when I'm talking about sparing the ride and the child, I'm talking about ensuring my kids' first experience will be that they are good. My kids' first experience will be that they are loved, that they belong, no matter what anyone else says. So many of us could truly benefit from shifting our parenting from I have to prepare you to experience this injustice to I am giving you a foundation, so you know that this injustice is secondary to your identity and not primary. That makes a difference. So again, so many of us, if we just shift our parenting mindset from I have to prepare you to experience this injustice to I'm giving you a foundation, so you know that when this injustice happens, it is secondary to your identity and not primary. And that's why this parenting is so important, because the reality is, you guys, historically, because we needed to be honest, we were so consumed with keeping the physical body safe, forgetting what it meant to keep our children's hearts and minds safe, which in turns affects the body. So I don't want my child to define themselves only by getting pulled over or the injustices that I know they may face as little Black kids, but I want them to think that those injustices are a reflection of this broken world and not of who they are. Big difference. So this is especially true for our Black boys, which is one reason why I'm so committed to giving our son as much grace as I feel like we have gotten from God. I'm committed to giving him as much love, as much mercy, as much kindness that we have gotten from God. And I commit to be gentle and fun, loving, and free with him. Because if the world is not going to let him be free, he needs to know that he can be free with us in his home, in his safe space, because there is a safe space. He can be free. All right. So I'm going to say this before I get ready to close out, because again, as Black people, we could really benefit to unlearn that just because as people, please hear me on this, just because as people, the reality is we develop as a culture, right? Historically, we develop a lot of resiliency. We develop perseverance and determination through our trauma. That does not mean that's the only way to develop those qualities. All right. I'm going to say that again. Just because we have developed resiliency and perseverance and determination historically through our trauma, that does not mean that's the only way to develop those qualities. It's not. So when we say they're not going to be prepared for the real world, they're not going to be ready. What we are really saying is that the only way we learn how to exhibit determination and perseverance is through enduring hardship. So we're saying that it's through withstanding trauma, through getting beat, that made us stronger and made us more resilient and that made us more disciplined and that made us who we are today. But just because many people obtain those traits from trauma, that does not mean trauma is the only thing that can produce those traits. It is so important that we unlearn that, okay? Because there is a such thing as warm sturdiness when it comes to being warm and kind to our kids. And we can be incredibly boundary, like we set clear boundaries with our kids, but they're set out of love for them and not out of fear. And that just makes me think of how the scripture said, perfect love cast out fear. And this is why I am so proud, you guys. And I say I am so proud to be a part of a generation who is so interested in breaking cycles and breaking these trauma cycles. And so many people ask, so what's the first step to break cycles? What's the first step? The first step is to actually change your mind about something, which is probably something you have already done if you consider yourself a conscious or gentle or positive parent, or maybe changing your mind about some things started tonight, as we talked about, spare the rod, spoil the child, or I turned out all right, or I'm preparing for the real world. Maybe you change your mind about some things about that tonight. Either way, that's the first step, to change our mind about some things. And the second step is to identify what are those patterns. Like, what are they? What actually are those patterns that we have inherited? I made the statement earlier about trauma can be inherited. And we call that epigenetics. So that means that trauma can literally leave a marker on our DNA. So if trauma goes unresolved and we give birth to kids, we unknowingly pass it on. And so the question becomes, how do you identify what's been passed to you? There's a book called What Happened to You, highly encourage and suggest you read it if you're interested in it. But it's called What Happened to You. And there's a portion of the book that talks about how even a fear of a dog can get passed down with no one ever telling you about it. Okay. So he talks about how you can have one family member attacked by a dog and how they're scared of dogs. And let's just say that person raised your grandmother in the way that they say, stay away from the dog. Dogs are dangerous. So now your grandmother gets this message of dogs are bad. And now your grandmother has your dad. And every time she walks with him, she squeezes his hand a little tighter and pulls him closer when she sees a dog. Now, she may not ever say to him that dogs are bad, but he got this nonverbal communication that dogs are not good. So now here you are all these years later saying, Dad, can we get a dog? He like, no, dogs are bad. dogs are not good, but he never even knew that his grandfather was attacked by a dog and doesn't honestly know why he doesn't even like dogs. It's just something that keeps going. It gets passed down from generation to generation. That's how trauma is passed down. Again, epigenetics, generation after generation. And I think that sometimes we think of cycle breaking as like this huge, glorious thing, but many times it's literally just sitting with the discomfort that was passed down to you. And I'm gonna share this, and I promise I'm closing out. But my husband recently shared something that was so powerful, and I asked him for permission to share it tonight. But he was talking about how the norm has always been for kids to not have a voice, for kids to stay out of grown folks' business, for kids to ask why and be told because I said so. And so that was literally a missing puzzle piece for him for why it's so frustrating to have to repeat himself more than once when he's talking to our kids. And it's because this idea of because I said so was literally inherited. It was literally passed down just like it has been for so many people. And so when reflecting on that and us talking about that, I really wanted that to be the challenge for tonight. I wanted to give you a practical step on how to identify those generational cycles, those generational patterns that may have been passed down that you weren't even quite aware of. All right. And so your challenge for tonight, I want you to ask yourself, what are the traits? What are the characteristics, the behaviors in your child that creates an internal negative physical reaction from you? All right. What are those things that your kid does that trigger you? Because that's the first step to really point to what are those things that were passed down, those traits, those cycles that were inherited. And we have to become aware before we talk about actually breaking them. All right. So that's your challenge. Ask yourself, reflect on it, write it down if you can. What are those traits? What are those characteristics, those behaviors in your child that create an internal physical negative response? What are those things your kids do that trigger you? All right. So have that time to reflect. That is our time for tonight. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, night 3. We'll talk about some actual practical steps. So if you are like, okay, yes, I'm with you, spare the ride and the child at least. Let's do this. What's next? I got you tomorrow. So I'll see you guys tomorrow at 7:30 Central Time. Good night.